Imagine walking outside on a summer morning and seeing a woman in the street dancing by herself, not celebrating, not performing, just dancing. At first, it might just seem a little strange, but what if she wouldn't stop? Not after hours went by, not after the day kept getting hotter, not after people begged her to sit down. And then, for some reason, other people started dancing too, one by one, until an entire town seemed to lose control of their own bodies. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, something happened that still sounds less like history and more like a curse. People danced for days, some until their feet bled, some until they collapsed, and according to the story that survived, some may have danced themselves to death. So, what actually happened? Was it mass hysteria, a religious panic, poison, a social breakdown, or was it something we still simply can't explain? This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518. Let's dig a little deeper on adjunct horror. This story usually begins with Frau Trophäa. According to various historical accounts, sometime in July of 1518, Frau Trophäa stepped into the streets of Strasbourg and started dancing. Not elegantly, not joyfully, not like someone entertaining a crowd. She danced in a way that seemed involuntary, as if something in her had broken loose. And what makes this story so disturbing is that she kept going. By some accounts, she danced for days. If this had stayed an isolated incident, it would be interesting, but we probably still wouldn't be talking about it. But it did not stay an isolated incident. Others joined her. More and more people started dancing, until so many people were dancing that local authorities had to decide what to do about it, and their decision just made everything worse. Officials in Strasbourg came to the conclusion that the afflicted needed to keep going. The thinking was that these people in the streets had to be allowed to basically dance it out. So instead of stopping the phenomenon, the authorities accommodated it. They cleared space in town, and they even brought in musicians. The city effectively turned the crisis into a public event. And if you're thinking, that doesn't sound like the best idea, you might be right. Because instead of fading away, the outbreak grew. Even more people joined, more bodies moved, more panic spread. And this is where the dancing plague stops feeling like a weird footnote in history, and oddly enough starts to feel deeply human, because the people in charge were trying to interpret something they did not understand, using the beliefs and information they had available to them at the time. And as is still often the case, when people don't understand what's happening, we can be really good at making things worse. The most dramatic versions of the dancing plague say that dozens or even hundreds of people were dancing at once, and many modern retellings repeat the same chilling claim: that people danced until they collapsed, and that some died from exhaustion, stroke, or heart failure. And that image of people collapsing and dying in the streets has made this event so unforgettable. A town trapped in motion, bodies refusing to stop, a mystifying incident with no clear solution. But this is also where we have to slow down for a second. Because one of the reasons the story of the dancing plague has survived is that it sits in that all too thrilling spot between history and legend. And once a story gets famous like this one, it often gets embellished. So, we need to ask the obvious question: how much of this is actually true? The dancing plague of 1518 is not something that was invented by modern pop culture. There are multiple historical references to it. It appears in medical notes, city documents, and in later historical writing. So yes, something definitely happened in Strasbourg. But the exact scale of the event is harder to pin down. We probably don't have a day-by-day breakdown of exactly how many people were dancing, how long they danced, or how many of them died. But to me, That uncertainty makes the story even more disturbing, not less, because if the most dramatic version has been exaggerated over time, we're still left with the fact that a group of people in 1518 appeared to experience some kind of shared escalating physical mania that nobody could explain. So, was it a curse, some kind of magical or supernatural event? Or was the answer physiological or even psychological? One of the most famous theories about the cause of the dancing plague is that the dancers had been poisoned by ergot. Ergot is a fungus that can grow on rye and other grains, and under the right conditions, it can produce compounds that affect the nervous system and can even lead to hallucinations. Ergot poisoning, or bad bread, is also one of the theories used as a possible cause of the witch hunts that led to the Salem witch trials. But with the dancing plague, there's a problem with the ergot theory. Ergot poisoning can absolutely cause severe physical and neurological symptoms, but it does not neatly explain why large numbers of people would all engage in a prolonged, coordinated, repetitive act like dancing for days. And if anything, the physical symptoms associated with ergot are often so brutal and debilitating that sustained dancing becomes less convincing, not more. So while bad bread is one of the most famous answers, a lot of historians don't think it fully explains what happened, which leaves us with a theory that is somehow more unsettling. The explanation that often gets taken most seriously today is that the dancing plague was some version of mass psychogenic illness. In simpler terms, a psychological crisis that spreads socially and begins to express itself physically. And if that sounds a little too modern to apply to the 1500s, it shouldn't. Because Strasbourg in 1518 was not exactly a stable, peaceful environment. This was a world shaped by famine, disease, religious fear, economic pressure, and constant uncertainty. And the belief that God, demons, or fate might be actively involved in your suffering was relatively common. So if a community already believed in curses, divine punishment, and saintly intervention, then a public, physical event could spread through the power of shared belief. That's what makes this theory so intriguing, because it suggests that these people were not pretending. They were not simply putting on a performance. They could very well have been experiencing something extremely real. Their bodies could have essentially been hijacked by their stress, convictions, and fears. But if you lived in Strasbourg in 1518, you would not have described this as a mass psychogenic illness. You might very well have described it as a spiritual curse. One of the beliefs associated with events like the dancing plague involved Saint Vitus, a primarily Catholic and Orthodox saint who became linked with convulsive movement disorders and involuntary bodily afflictions. In some traditions, dancing compulsions and uncontrollable movement were interpreted as a kind of spiritual punishment or possession. And so once you understand that, the dancing plague might not become easier to explain, but it does become a little easier to imagine. Because if enough people believed the afflicted were under supernatural or saintly influence, then the city itself could have further fueled the outbreak. Every stare, every whisper, every prayer, every public reaction, every rumor, it all just feeds the event. This dancing plague. It causes panic to turn to frenzy until people quite literally start dying in the streets. That's one of the reasons stories like this fascinate me, because whether you think the cause of the dancing plague was spiritual, social, neurological, or supernatural, it feels like a kind of horror that's completely recognizable to me, even today. Because we still live in a world where fear spreads quickly, where stress becomes physical, where public behavior can become contagious, and where we all have these times when we step back and think, what am I even doing? And how can I stop doing it? If you like weird little moments where history, horror, and folklore start to blend, subscribe to Adjunct Horror. And if there's another weird historical event you'd like me to cover, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye, y'all.